As an apex predator, Tyrannosaurus rex was always rare. Amongst the many threats faced throughout the lifetime of the genus, few could have done the kind of damage its own fame has. With the increase of debate on commercial versus professional fossil excavation over the years, the tyrant lizard king has found itself the epicenter of the discussion. But what really has been the damage these debates have left to the reputation of the Rex? One of the world's leading Tyrannosaur experts weighs in. There are few paleontologists who've worked as extensively with Tyrannosaurus rex as Dr. Thomas Carr. Dr. Carr is currently part of the biology faculty at Carthage College and publishes quite frequently, describing new species of dinosaurs every few years. He was also one of, if not the first scientist to publish on the ontogenetic changes in tyrannosaurs all the way back in 1999. He's part of the Nanotyrannosaurus juvenile T.rex camp. In April of 2025, he published a paper in the journal Paleontologia Electronica on the fossil trade and how Tyrannosaurus plays into it, since it's a central piece akin to Bitcoin. His perspective has always been anti-fossil trade, and he often provides quite valid points he backs up with facts and logic. Though his takes on this subject have also garnered plenty of criticism, and for the love of God, don't ask him about Israel. Commercial paleontology, or commercial fossil hunting, involves the extraction, preparation, sale, and exhibition of fossils for chiefly monetary gain. This contrasts with academic paleontology, which is an overly broad term that covers a couple different things that also often overlap with commercial paleontology. Academic paleo is the umbrella term that covers what students and professors do at universities. They go out to find fossils on public or private land with permits, return what they find to their institution or museum repository, prepare their finds in the lab, and then describe them in a scientific paper in a journal if what they found represents something new to science. The specimens that are published on must be in an ostensibly public institution so that any future paleontologist could theoretically come back and restudy or reuse a given specimen in whatever project they are doing. This allows the scientific method to be conducted unimpeded. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but we don't need to get into the weeds here. I say that they often overlap because there are plenty of scientifically published specimens that were originally discovered, extracted, prepared, sold, and bought via commercial paleontology. That said, this practice has come under scrutiny in recent decades due to unethical, incomplete, or incompetent practices by some commercial paleo outfits, resulting in stolen fossils, fossils that are unethically sourced such as Burmese or Myanmar amber, or fossils with no provenance data. The practice of commercial paleontology has always been a factor in the field of paleontology, ever since fossils were first found and recognized as pieces of past life to be appreciated. This practice, especially historically, isn't always at odds with the more scientifically disciplined aspect of paleontology. Numerous commercial contributors to paleontology, such as Mary Anning, John Bell Hatcher, and the Sternbergs, helped ensure that scientifically valuable specimens were found and recognized by experts, then taken into institutions where they could be both studied by said experts and appreciated by the public. Numerous commercial fossil excavators do work closely with institutions like universities or established museums to help procure specimens. However, in more recent decades especially, there has been a growing trend of commercial fossil hunting being more independent and more money-minded. Ever since the discovery of the famous Tyrannosaur specimen, Sue, there have been ever-growingly complex disputes over impressive specimens. Sue itself was excavated by a commercial group, the Black Hills Institute, and then was situated in the middle of a complex legal battle once the complexities of its excavation and how many dollar signs could be involved caught a lot of different people's attention. In the end, Sue escaped the black box of a private collection with the help of the combination of public fundraising and several big money donations from horrific corporations like McDonald's and Walt Disney. might be one of the handful of good things these soulless entities have ever done, let's be real. All to ensure that one of the largest and most complete Tyrannosaurs ever discovered would be forever available for study and display at the Chicago Field Museum. However, since the 1990s, more and more fossils excavated by private enterprises have followed in the footsteps of Sue, with many unable to escape the black box. More and more have involved price tags that make the 8 million Sue sold for looking like the result of stacking coupons in the clearance section by comparison. Landowners, fossil hunters, and other private individuals have been increasingly selling high-profile fossils as luxury items, much the same way someone would sell fine art. These fossil specimens often wind up going on auction for prices that are drastically outside the budget any museum is willing or even capable of paying. Though it's usually the former, let's be real. Since many of these commercial outfits and auctions sell fossils essentially as fine art, they are subject to speculator inflation and price hikes. Ever since the Sue auction, the average price for even a partially complete dinosaur skeleton has rapidly increased more and more by the year. This also includes incomplete but eye-catching pieces like skulls. Furthermore, these exact parts are often the most diagnostic for studies looking into population demographics and individual variation across species. Many of these specimens end up in showrooms for the rich and famous or private museum displays. To clarify, a specimen taken off public access for study doesn't necessarily mean the specimen is locked away and kept out of view. Some might get confused about what's the problem if a private institution houses a prominent skeleton under their banner. The issue is how scientific research can or cannot be conducted. Say, for example, an institution claims that they have discovered and are displaying a specimen with unique characteristics, such as a record-breaking individual or one with unusual anatomical traits like a four-horned triceratops. This private enterprise or group might be open to one scientist studying their specimen and publishing literature about it. However, science works by double-checking itself. One doesn't need to look far in both historic and contemporary paleontology, from the Victorian-era antediluvian Leviathan lizards to the constant debate back and forth about the habits of Spinosaurus, to see that peer review process involved. It is essential for making sure studies can be fact-checked so they hold up to scrutiny. This is the same with any science, from physics to biology. When someone makes a claim, their peers need to be able to take it to task to evaluate if they might be fabricating evidence or had simply missed some details. Now suppose the private individual or institution holding a specimen that initially was open to study decides, for whatever reason, to restrict access to the fossil. Maybe they changed their mind, maybe policy changed, maybe the specimen's ownership changed hands to someone who didn't want the same thing as the prior one. Now, that previous study cannot be fact-checked or evaluated, and with a science that often requires measurements made in the millimeters for even multi-ton animals, and are often concerned with information like bone histology, chemical makeup, and stratigraphic information to understand the time and places these organisms lived in, just looking at the skeletons on display is effectively useless. The commercialization of fossils has been a point of concern for many researchers. Dr. Carr cited a 2014 Paleontologia Electronica paper by Kenshu Shimada, Phil Curry, Eric Scott, and Stuart Sumida as they brought up the topic of commercialization of fossils causing scientific snafus. In the study, the researchers identified the increasing appeal of fossils on the market as one of the three greatest challenges to paleontology in the 21st century. In that now over a decade-old paper, the authors identified public misinformation about the problems the commercial market is causing. The authors identified public misinformation about the problems the commercial market is causing research and the lack of recognition about the problem by paleontologists as both causes for alarm and some of the chief reasons the issue has gotten as bad as it had. This situation has only gotten worse since 2014. Some of the claims made by Shimada et al. 2014, such as the increase in fossil sales over time, sales largely focused on high-profile auctions, and selling of important fossils, have resulted in the decline of collections. Dr. Carr statistically evaluated these claims and proved they were soberingly prophetic. Contrastingly, Carr also evaluated numerous claims by commercial interest from the late 2000s into the 2010s. Many of these arguments in favor of commercial paleontology boiled down to good faith arguments, such as collected specimens by private ventures usually wind up in museums anyways, that commercially obtained fossils are intensely scientifically studied, that private collectors frequently donate specimens to research programs, and that most commercial collectors are not in it for the money. The evaluation by Dr. Carr unfortunately found almost none of these claims held up to scrutiny. For example, the few privately collected T.rex specimens that have ended up in the public trust, like Sue, are often the exceptions to the rule. Donations are sadly rare, and a majority of the Tyrannosaurus fossils outside of the public trust are kept in commercial stockrooms or collections. That the players involved in the private side of fossil collection and sale are not in it for the money is a bad faith argument, as the numerous instances of private specimens heading first to an auction house attest. It might be easy to look at already well-known and publicized species like Tyrannosaurus rex and assume there is no harm in some specimens, even perhaps many specimens, being inaccessible for research. But there is far more in paleontology than just classifying new species and calling it a day. The study of ancient organisms like dinosaurs doesn't stop at just adding another name to the collection of known taxa or getting an estimate of their general size. With a dinosaur specimen, scientists can analyze many things, such as bone histology or the microscopic structures within the bones, which can provide data on life history, stratigraphy, or the layers of sediment that preserved the bones, ontogeny, or how animals grow as they age, or phylogeny, or how animals are related to one another. Every one of these areas of study requires lots of specimens. For as much as Carr has been whining about selling dinosaurs, the Tyrannosaurus genus does at least have a good number of specimens in the public trust for study, and that's one of the big reasons why, alongside its fame, it continues to be the mascot of Dinosauria. That said, if scientists can tease out so much information on the tyrant lizard king with access to less than half of the known specimens, imagine what they could do with every single one. And now, imagine the potential damage this could do to the study of other, less charismatic fauna. Diplodocus, Allosaurus, Albertosaurus, Stegosaurus, and the quite rare Deinonychus have all wound up for sale to the ultra-rich for use as investments or personal projects. Many of these specimens wind up completely out of the public view, or even taken so far out of their original context that study would be difficult even under the best circumstances. To this, Carr was able to evaluate the damage in raw numbers with T.rex as the species of focus. To get even somewhat reliable information about demographics, life history, and individual variation, usually sample sizes of nearly 100 organisms are typically needed. Currently, there are just over 60 reasonably complete Tyrannosaurus rex specimens situated in institutions around the world that are accessible for study. There are at least over 70 in private hands, effectively barred from research, and some of these individuals might provide critical information. It's estimated that 20% of all of the private Tyrannosaurus specimens known are likely subadults or juveniles, any of which could provide critical information about the life history and biology of an animal that is otherwise mostly known from adult specimens. Some have argued that specimens in private collections do eventually end up in public access. However, as Dr. Carr points out in the paper, this is not at all common. Of all the Tyrannosaur specimens that were from private collections or dug up by private enterprises he could track, only 11% eventually saw some amount of public access. Every time a T.rex did wind up in a major museum, the previously privately collected specimen was purchased by museums or groups acting on their behalf, not donated out of goodwill. Various arguments have been made for why major fossils should still be available in the private sector. A vast majority of the Tyrannosaurus rex specimens that enter the private sector are from Montana and South Dakota. Here, landowners might lease rights for digging to various groups and make large profits if they find anything. Some of these landowners otherwise might be living on thin margins economically and see it as their right to make money off of what is on their property. Scientific institutions that dig on such property often do work with said landowners and try to get them compensated all the same. A problem, however, is that private groups often chase the big bucks, tempting plenty of landowners to seek bigger payouts for financial security by working with commercial fossil hunters exclusively. Various groups and countries have argued for and implemented rules or compensation agreements, so scientifically important specimens found on private land can have the landowner make a good profit out of it too. The United States, however, has largely lagged behind in some of this legislation and left it to private groups to handle. Typical. Once again, the issue, Carr warns, is not getting better. The rate of private exploitation of scientifically important fossils has only increased with time. His overview found that private groups are currently uncovering and extracting specimens at roughly double the rate of universities and museums. There is a worrying trend that while the tyrant lizard king is the crown jewel of many private enterprises seeking huge payouts, other fossil animals have been increasingly put under the same kind of trajectory towards auction houses. While the famous genus Velociraptor would technically be spared from a lot of this attention as Mongolia strictly forbids export of major fossils, this didn't stop some enterprising auctioneers from once again slapping that name onto a specimen of Deinonychus that went to auction at Christie's in 2022, selling the raptor from Jurassic Park for over $12 million. This specimen did eventually end up in a museum all the way in China. In 2012, Heritage Auctions put a Tarbosaurus specimen up for sale. Notably, when the skeleton hit the showroom floor, it was sold as a Tyrannosaurus specimen, specifically to increase its marketing value. Several commentators pointed out the specimen clearly was not from where the seller was claiming it was from, and could not have come from any of the countries allowing the sale of such fossils. This specimen had been illegally excavated and exported out of Mongolia. After United States v. 1 Tyrannosaurus Batar skeleton, the specimen was repatriated back to Mongolia, with the smugglers responsible given criminal charges. This fiasco, involving multiple countries and criminal groups, shows just how complex this commercialization of fossils has become. Actor Nicolas, of all people, became aware of the situation and found out he had unwittingly purchased another smuggled Tarbosaurus specimen. In this case, a skull purchased at auction from the same smugglers in 2007. Cage actually chose to do the right thing and return the skull to Mongolia, but it goes to show how pervasive the problem is. Sadly, for many American fossils from the heavily exploited Hell Creek Formation, the problems don't stop after the fossil has been excavated and sold on the private market, even if they do eventually end up in public collections. Most commercial fossil hunting outfits do not keep thorough logs and details about the exact location, stratigraphy, and conditions of an excavation. This means there is a complete loss of small nuances at a fossil site, such as microfossils and sediments that can indicate where an animal was laid to rest and under what circumstances. For many private Tyrannosaurus specimens, it might be impossible to tell their life story up to the time of death or under what conditions that they fossilize. It also means forming an exact chronology, and more precise dating of the fossils is also extremely difficult, if not impossible. These are just some of the ways that the private ownership and commercialization of Tyrannosaurus fossils have caused a tremendous and perhaps irreversible loss of data available to scientific study. From the bones to the enclosing rock, everything that would have been scientifically informative was left at the auction house door. The private ownership of fossils is a complex question with a lot of complex answers. Many scientists are willing to work with collectors and private landowners who want to further the understanding of past life. There have been arguments that some commonplace fossils aren't necessarily scientifically important in every circumstance, and some amount of private ownership can work just fine. The problem, however, is that more and more potentially very important specimens are kept out of the public trust, or never had the chance to enter it, and more often than not, greed seems to be the primary motive. This problem has been especially prevalent for Tyrannosaurus, but could easily impact the understanding of other dinosaurs and ancient fauna as well. So long as circumstances remain as they are, more and more specimens might be lost behind the doors of the ultra-rich, and kept in showrooms instead of museums. Hopefully, in the future, changes in legislations and more public awareness of the problem might help bring about averting this fate for more prominent fossil specimens. I personally think that collection of scientifically unimportant fossils is not a bad practice. I know of some folks that think there should be an outright blanket ban on commercial collection of any fossil. But if we're being real here, there are thousands of shells of most species of ammonoids, bivalves, or brachiopods, and you can get statistics for these animals from the amount that has already been collected. There are entire rock units composed almost entirely of shells too, so I don't really consider that realistic. I also believe that academics, independents, and commercial collectors should work more tightly with one another to get important finds to public institutions. Take advantage of the super rich for the betterment of science and mankind, I say. In an ideal world, I think a government compensation to the landowners and any entity responsible for the collection or preparation of private land-housed fossils should be implemented. Unfortunately, the US is a backwards, anti-science, anti-academic hellscape ruled by the most incompetent, sexually repressed, corrupt, unintelligent, racist, unqualified baboons that have ever devolved from our species. So don't count on any laws about fossils coming out anytime soon, especially with the current state of the government and the world. Sad to say, but I think we have better things to worry about than dinosaurs right now. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, like this video, drop a comment in the comment section below, and hit the bell icon to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching.